Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome to our second session on the early churches, architecture and iconography, especially with our focus on the mosaics. So tonight we're covering Ravenna and Rome. But before we begin, not to forget, the Heavenly King, comfort the spirit of truth, right everywhere present and fill the full things, treasury of blessings in view of life, come and abundance and cleanse from every impurity, save our souls a good one. Okay, so a tiny little bit of revision from last fortnight. And when we were looking at the frescoes and mosaics of the churches in Constantinople, or Istanbul, as it's called now, in Hagia Sophia and Hora. These were not earlier than the 10th century. The mosaics in the great church. And as regards the small monastery church of the Hora, 14th century. So the reason for that is that the great church did not retain, as I think I mentioned last time, it did not retain its beautiful mosaics of the 6th century, the 500s, when it was built in 532 to 537 during the reign and the expressed sort of like initiative from the emperor himself, Justinian the Great. 532, 537, yes. So the iconoclasts who did a lot of damage to iconography from 726 AD when it began, with a break around the Seventh Ecumenical Council of 787, and then a second installment of the persecutions against the icons by the iconoclasts in the 9th century, and so these were not retained in many places of the East at all. And so what we will see tonight in photos of Ravenna's and Rome's sacred spaces is iconography of the early Byzantine and Roman period. Okay, so we'll see some religious artwork of the 400s and 500s, and some frescoes in Rome a little bit later, in the 800s. You'll note that all of the inscriptions in Ravenna's mosaics are in Latin, even though they were crafted by Byzantine artists who came from Constantinople at that time. Now, I mentioned that the people of Constantinople always referred to themselves as Romans. So until the time of Justinian and possibly a little bit after him, Latin was the official language, not only in the West, but of course in the East as well. I'll come around and sit here so you're just off camera. Okay. All right. Can you see the image here? Okay. Right. So the style is simple and resembles ancient Roman and Egyptian art much more than the developed style of middle and late Byzantine iconography. So now, operator, Chris, could we have the first file, Abruzzo, Tuscany? Oh, you can see on that one. Okay, that's good. All right, yes, thank you. It's just, all right. So, I'd just like to mention that I left off in southern Italy, in the city of Bari, where which was the sort of apex of our journey, and a pilgrimage to the relics of St. Nicholas under the altar of the crypt church. From there, we took a 9-seater car for a group of 6 people, and we traveled along the Adriatic through the region, Reggio of Abruzzo. Is it visible now? Yeah, you can see the view? Okay, good. So you can see the way there. It's not far from the coast, but we've got snow-capped mountains there, so very pretty landscape. So from there, from Abruzzo, we turned left towards Rome, but before reaching Rome, we turned north again, and in the evening of that day, we drove all day, we reached our destination in country Tuscany, which was a base for the next 5 days. From there, we traveled to Siena, Florence, and a small fortified town near the village where we lived. So let's, I wonder if I press on that, will it change? Yep, should change. Okay. So here you've got Siena, the cathedral, which was completed, at least externally, and a lot of the artwork was still continued in the subsequent decades and even centuries. But in 1215, early 13th century, this is, you've got a Romanesque / Gothic building. All right, so let's just shift that. That's inside. Very Western, a different sort of feel to the spaces that we saw last time in the remnants of ancient Constantinople, and symbolic of the city of Siena is that striped black and white symbol that is used, which looks a bit like a zebra there. Anyway, so let's see, next one. From there, we went to Florence, which was almost a total fiasco. I don't want to show you very much about that. And my interest is not to tell you all that much about the medieval cities and medieval and Renaissance Western religious art, but here's just a sample where it begins to change from the inspired iconography of the East. This is, I think, late 12th, early 13th century Western icon. Still very strong Byzantine influence, as you can see. Right? Mother of God. And as a matter of fact, it retains some of the ancient sort of Roman. If I just zoom in with my fingers, will that be okay? I'll try it. Yeah, have a look at the face of the Mother of God. So that's a reflection of sort of early Roman art as well. And when we go to the mosaics further on, you'll see that those, very strong features and big eyes in the mosaics. So this retains, mid Byzantine development, a little bit of the ancient Roman art, and some influences of more modern European art creeping in. All right, so I'll just, this is Now, this shows much more medieval influence, and it's getting to, unfortunately, I can't tell you exactly who the artist there is, but it's getting close to Giotto in the 14th century. So I think this might be late 13th, early 14th century. Still a little bit of influence from the Byzantine art in the way that this icon of 5 figures of Christ and the Mother of God. I think that looks like John the Evangelist, and then Peter and Paul. More Western influence. Now, as I said, my interest was not so much with medieval and especially Renaissance art, because that's full on humanistic art. And I was interested in the early Western art, which shows the common ground, East-West. So this is just to give you an idea of the narrow streets in these medieval Italian towns, with a nice sort of a view through this canyon into the countryside. This is taken in this fortified town. I think it was called, doesn't matter, small fortified town, about half an hour from Siena and an hour from Florence. Okay, now this is now Ravenna, and we're looking at a huge font for adults. Now people throw money in there, wishing well, but before, in the early times, of course, it was a church and a baptistry, right? And people, there were obviously multiple baptisms happening in that big font, and that's an altar in the font now, built this is 5th century, all right, labeled in Latin. So that's the end of that. Could we go to the Ravenna file? Thanks, Wes. So just bear with me. So I'll start talking about Ravenna while we're changing over to the other folder. So a little bit of historic background. See, yes, that's the one. Yep, that's the first one in the Ravenna folder. What happened in 410 AD was that Rome was overcome by Gothic tribes, and the emperor and the senate had to sort of flee, and a temporary capital was established for the western part of the Roman Empire in the city of Milan. But Milan was much harder to defend than Rome, and Rome proved impossible to defend because it was a huge space, and you needed tens of thousands of troops to man the walls. Otherwise, you couldn't defend it. So Emperor Honorius was the son of the man who built the great walls of Constantinople. That's Theodosius the Great. So his 2 sons became emperors of East and West. Arcadius in the east and Honorius in the west. Okay, so Honorius quickly realized that Ravenna was a much better choice for his capital because it was surrounded by water. It was much easier to defend. So he moved the capital there. So now I showed you one shot of the baptistry. this is the Orthodox baptistry. Now, the thing is that in the later part of the 5th century, Ravenna too was overwhelmed by the Goths. Now, the Goths were Arians. Arians were followers of Arius. And now I can't go into all the historical details why it happened, but they were converted by the Arians. And when they took over parts of the empire, of course, they introduced Arianism to these places. And so they also built some churches, and there is a baptistry which we did not visit, the Arian baptistry. But this is the Orthodox baptistry, okay? All right, so it was built during the time of Bishop Neon of Ravenna, who was there from 450 AD to 475 AD. Okay, so that's the age of this baptistry. And as a matter of fact, this is the best preserved early baptistry in the world. Now, so it's an octagonal building. It's not huge, but it's quite, you could see from the size of the font that it's not small either. You know, you could baptize you know, a fair group of people in there. Okay. Now, the central mosaic, we're looking straight up at the ceiling now. It's a complex composition showing the baptism of Christ in the medallion with surrounding figures, the pillars of the church. Yes, St. Peter and Paul, yes, correct, and 10 other apostles. So they are, if I use this, yes, I can use this. So Peter and Paul, where are they? Yeah, they're just here, and then the rest of the apostles. All right. Next tier down shows some empty altars and altars and empty judgment seats. Now let's have a look at the central scene. That's just a detail of the wall. Central scene. Okay, that's interesting because on the one hand, it's a very ancient composition, which is unusual in later times because it shows Christ completely naked. Okay, which was not done later on, but it's a reflection on the way that people were actually baptized in the early church, completely naked, right? And for that reason, deaconesses used to baptize the women because obviously it was considered indelicate for male priests to baptize them, right? Now, so this figure here, Holy Spirit, John the Baptist, that's clear. This figure is a symbolic figure, personification of Jordan River. So he's got the towel in one hand and a reed rowing in the banks of the Jordan. Now, a very interesting modification of the ancient mosaic is this thing here. Now that's it's a later insertion, and you can see these tessera, the little pieces of mosaic, are lighter than the surrounding, and we can tell from this composition that St. John the Baptist would have held his hand on the head of Christ, you know, total immersion. Later on, when the Western practice changed, he's shown holding up a little bowl, a patera, you know, and pouring water on the head of Christ. So it's an obvious later insertion, and that is admitted even by the official Catholic publication in Ravenna. So nowadays they quite honest about this. All right. So some details of the apostolic tier. There they are, some of the apostles. Close up, yeah, holding their, there's another one, some more, they're all holding crowns for martyrdom. That's the southwestern corner of the Basilica of Saint Apollinarius, which was a large church that was built by the Ostrogothic King Theodoric in the late 400s, and the early 500s. See, the Goths were Arians, but the Orthodox Catholics were successful in assimilating them and converting them to the Orthodox faith. They abandoned their heretical views eventually and blended in to the populace. So this is a courtyard just outside the, let me see, the southern wall of the basilica. And there's a courtyard down the back. There used to be the bishop's residence, but now it's just a tourist office. Now, we have a picture, a mosaic of Emperor Justinian. These mosaics come from his time. Obviously, they show him. Now, Emperor Justinian might be evident from his face. He came from peasant stock, and a simple sort of simple facial features came from the people. He was a Roman from the Adriatic, from Illyricum. His native tongue was Latin. He spoke Latin in Constantinople. Right. His uncle, Justin, moved up the ranks of the Imperial Guard and eventually became the general there, and he helped his nephew to become the next emperor. So that was quite clever. Now, Justinian received a very good education in the law, and he did a lot of work on the law. I can't get into that detail. He revised Roman law and adapted it to Christian principles in Constantinople. Wrote these revised laws, and he also studied theology. So to this day, at every liturgy, we sing one of his hymns, The Only Begotten. That's Justinian. The Only Begotten refers to Jesus Christ. Right. Yes. A fortnight ago, I mentioned that he was the builder of Hagia Sophia Church. He dreamed of restoring the ancient Roman Empire in its fullness that it existed, back several centuries earlier, before the Goths began to quickly, rather quickly, but systematically. They basically wanted jobs from the Roman Empire. And when the Roman Empire couldn't pay for them to work in the Roman army, they just took over. Okay. But Justinian, he was successful through a couple of very able military men, namely Belisarius, especially general, to recapture northern Africa, parts of Italy, including Ravenna, some other places. Now, so that's a close-up. This is a mosaic of Christ enthroned. Now, this is, of course, taken from the floor level, and maybe if I stood further back, the angle wouldn't, the distortion wouldn't be as much. So it's a bit squat, the figure, but you can still see the beauty of this composition, Christ's face. Okay. So I'll show you context of this icon. So here, Christ is surrounded by 4 angels, and he has on his left, just there, he's got Bishop Martinius, a martyr, receiving the martyr's crown and holding it differentially with his outer garment. This is the way that, for instance, the priests with the long phalonians, the early phalonians, the ones that are still used in the Balkans of Greece. Russians have short ones, so you can't do that. But they take the gospel, and it's a sort of a differential way of handling sacred objects. Okay, so further on, we have a row of male martyrs on one side, the right-hand side, or so that's the southern side of the Basilica Church, holding their crowns. Here you have the Mother of God with 4 angels that sort of parallels the composition with Christ. So she's here. I'll just have a look. Oh, wait a minute. Yeah. So see, very large eyes. That's typical of early iconography and mosaics. Okay. Here we see the the Magi bringing. Let's take it back. Bringing gifts to Christ. So here's the Mother of God and the Magi there. There they are. They're even labeled here in Latin. Balthazar, Melchior, and Gaspar. Okay. This is just a general view of the northern side, the female martyrs there. And some detail. Now that's labeled Palatium. There it is. It's labeled there in Latin. Palatium comes from the Palatine hill in Rome, where the palaces were. So that is the origin of the word palace in the English language. So this is a view towards the east, towards the sanctuary. This is a very typical early Christian church. The basilica with 2 rows of columns and arches, and the tall part in the middle with lower parts of the church to the north and south. Okay. This is the outside and the facade, western facade, and the bell tower, which would have been built later. However, I don't have the exact details on when exactly it was built, because bells were introduced only in the 9th century in Italy. Okay, the technology of producing these castings they were originated in Campania. That's why they're called campanili. The bells originally. So here we proceed from the church, the Basilica of Saint Apollinaris, an early martyr who lived in sort of like the apostolic age, or later part of the 1st century. Here we come to the octagonal, beautiful church of Saint Vitalis. this is Ravenna again, and it's an octagonal church. I think I mentioned that. So this is a picture in the just in front of the sort of like a vault in front of the sanctuary, looking south. So it shows the composition of. There'll be some details. Hospitality of Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac by. We'll come back to that in a minute. This shows Emperor Justinian with a group of his courtiers and also churchmen. And here's Maximianus, the local bishop of Ravenna at that time. By the way, the bishop of Ravenna, during the time when Ravenna became the western capital of the Roman Empire, the bishop of Ravenna was the second bishop in the west after the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome. Yet it was very influential, important, and the emperor insisted that he should be next to Rome. Okay, in the ecclesiastical sense. Okay, so let's have a look. This is looking up at that towards the center, so the east that way, and we're looking sort of west. This is the central part of the octagonal church, the tallest part, but this is more interesting because it's got the early mosaics, whereas the central part, unfortunately, is much later frescoes. Okay, and they're they show Renaissance art, but this is early stuff. And the interesting thing here is that you see the Lamb of God here, right at the top, at the pinnacle. I think we have a better view. So this is the composition of showing Abel here labeled and Melchizedek, who greeted Abraham with bread and wine, a powerful image of Christ. This is right in the sanctuary apse, a powerful composition of Christ with the two angels and handing the martyr's crown to the saint to whom the temple is dedicated, Saint Vitalis. There he is. That's him. And Ecclesius is the bishop who presents the octagonal church to Christ. Is the current bishop of that time. Interestingly, Christ is shown here as a beardless young man, you see the bishop is shaven too. Now, this was common especially in the West, because the Roman tradition was for men to shave, right? As a matter of fact, even in the East, only the monastics wore beards, and the clergy was not necessarily accustomed. But you see that by the 4th century, at least the bishops, like the famous ones like St. Basil, St. John Chrysostom, they do have beards. But the clergy in the East began to wear beards by the 9th century, everywhere. In the West, they didn't. They still continue shaving. So that's the different tradition. Now, this is on the other side, a beautiful composition of the Empress Theodora with her ladies in waiting and a couple of courtiers on her right. And she's presenting probably looks like a donation probably to the church, right? Because the emperors often paid for these expensive projects like covering a church in mosaics, very expensive. Prophet Isaiah's, this is an overall view of this beautiful space with the Lamb of God here, right at the apex. And it's such a complex and beautiful space. Now, I recently had one of our parishioners come and to tell me that he spent some time living in Germany, Western Germany, Aachen, and Charlemagne in the early 800s literally copied this church. He liked it so much, the church in Ravenna, and he built it in Aachen, and still standing. People go, it's got mosaics as well, but in the early 9th century. Again, a detail, close-up of the composition there. That's a close-up of the hospitality of Abraham. Here's Abraham and here's Sarah. And interestingly, these three travelers are shown quite young and like angelic. This gives an impression of that complex space, beautiful space. I took that picture from the font at the back of the church. It's close to the wall, so people were sometimes adults were baptized there in the early days. Another view of Abel and Melchizedek. This is just some outside views of that church with a huge flying buttress to support the sanctuary part. See, there it is again. Some more shots. Now we've moved on to the church. It's not a church. It's a mausoleum. It's a mausoleum of the daughter of the emperor, Galla Placidia, who died and was buried there so since 5th century. Okay. Yeah, there are a couple of other terms there too, but just to show you some. Doesn't want to. What's happened here? Have we run out of? There were a couple more images which I can't see here. Well, anyway, let's go to the Roman folder now. Okay. If I find the mausoleum, the mausoleum has some nice mosaics. It's got a vault with a starry sky, lots of gold stars, which you can't see on this picture, but I've got some picture elsewhere. What's happening here? Right. Now, in Rome, of course, again, we focused on the early churches. And we covered a number of churches. The first one which you'll see is the Church of St. Clement. Now that's an interesting and very early church located about 700 meters from the Colosseum. All right. In the 1st century, there was a pagan temple and a school dedicated to the Persian god Mithra. And these devotees of Mithra used to gather there. And as a matter of fact, when Nero burnt Rome down because he didn't like some of the slums, and he wanted to build some new flashy buildings, there was a lot of rubble left. And so the street level there rose tremendously. So this temple was buried. And in the 4th century, the Christians built, once Christianity was legalized, the Christians built a temple dedicated to one of the first bishops of St. Clement. We transmitting sound at least?
Yeah, still.
Okay, right. So, yes. The interesting thing is that later on, the temple was abandoned, and in the 11th century, another church was built on top of it. Underneath that 4th century church was filled with rubble, and the new church was built on top. But
Is that what you want to share? Is that what you want to share?
It's showing the picture of the last picture in Ravenna. I need to go to Rome. So we need the Rome, where are you? Yep, it's just here somewhere, Rome, down the bottom. That's Ravenna, no, next down, yep, beautiful. Okay, let's open up that one. And, and unfortunately, what may have happened is that these slides are sort of mixed up, not in the same sequence. This shows the Colosseum, obviously, the Colosseum at night. Yeah, see, that's the last part. It's sort of going in reverse order. Oh dear. All right. Well, we'll work backwards. So that is now what used to be what was built as a pagan temple, the Pantheon. Massive columns. Each one of those weighs 50 tons, and was brought from Egypt, from the sourced in Egypt and brought by barge and boat. How on earth they moved them, I don't know, but they did. They set them up. They must have had some sort of brains, obviously. But there was a pagan temple that became known among the Romans as the Pantheon, okay, dedicated to all the gods. The first one of these built on that spot was built in 29 BC. The second one in the 1st century, and this was built in the early 2nd century, right? And it is the oldest building in the world in continuous use. Can you imagine that? It's been going for like 1900 years. Something to that extent. Yeah. So that's some pictures from the outside. And this is inside. Now, obviously, the Christians, when the church was given to the Church of Rome in the year 609 AD, they began to add some Christian motifs, and there are some mosaic crosses there, and the altar. So this is the sanctuary, But the shapes of the building are unchanged. So this used to be a pagan temple. Now it has the Christian altar there. I'll talk about this large icon of the Mother of God. So there it is. This is a very early Western icon of the Mother of God holding Christ child, early 600s. So it's on a panel, a board, painted on a board, and is displayed vertically there. This is the famous, the largest unreinforced concrete dome in the world. It's large. The opening there is 9 meters in diameter, and it's the main source of light during the day. And when it rains, the rain just falls down on the central part and runs off. The floor is built in such a way that it just drains. But if it's a light rain, the currents of convection of air force the rain away. It's to create a sort of a shield. That's very smart. Okay. I'm sorry, but my pictures are in reverse order. So this is a cross that was installed at the Colosseum. Now, in the 19th century, there was an idea to build a large altar with a cupola beside the Colosseum, but never took off. So at least there's a cross that enables people to remember that thousands of Christians were thrown to the lions there. So that's one of the surrounding sort of colonnades, Colosseum. And as we went around, Mashka and I mentally or quietly sang hymns to the martyrs. Yeah, imagine 50 to 80,000 people would sit around there and watch the gladiators and the animals and so on. In the couple of hundred years that it operated, 800,000 people died on this arena and over 1 million animals. Now, this is a mosaic from the earliest existing church in Rome. This is the Church of Saint Prudentia, early 4th century. And it shows the Ancient of Days, a mosaic there. And that's a mosaic, 4th century mosaic. And at the back, showing quite clear early Roman artwork there, the style. That's an overall view of an illuminated view in a minute. That's a detail of that large composition showing the one of the holy popes. Is Saint Felix Papa, Pope of Rome, martyr, who holds the. No, he wasn't a martyr, but he was the builder of the church, so he holds the church. And here we've got Saint Paul embracing one of the 2 unmercifully healers, Cosmas and Damian. There they are. So we got Peter there, St. Peter, and St. Paul. The interesting thing is that St. Paul is on the right of Christ, not St. Peter. And here is an Eastern saint. We'll see him in a minute, Theodore. Saint Theodore, martyr. Again, he holds his martyr's crown. Theodore. Tiro is celebrated on Saturday, first week of Lent, the central figure of Christ. um, very sort of Roman type of imagery. So that seems to be the end there. Oh no, here we go. We're going now down. The mosaics that you saw there, they were from the church of, sorry, it's a bit of a mishmash because unfortunately the slides got mixed up. We're going down from the street level that I just showed you with the St. Peter and Paul and St. Cosmas and Damian, underground, well, yes, to the sort of basement level where the 4th century church of St. Clement is. So that shows the translation of the relics of, here's the reliquary, of the great early Bishop of Rome, St. Clement. Now, his relics were brought to Rome in the 800s, around 860, forget the exact year, at the time when the Bishop of Rome, Pope of Rome, was Adrian, and they were received. St. Cyril and Methodius, the evangelizers of the Slavs, they found these relics in Crimea, and they brought them to Rome because they needed to speak to the Pope because they were having a problem. The German bishops working in Moravia were trying to stop them from using the Slavonic language, the vernacular language that the ruler, Great Prince Rostislav, asked them to evangelize the Slavs in the Slavic language. But the German bishops were trying to use Latin. So the evangelizers, the St. Cyril and Methodius, went to Rome. They brought the relics, which were, of course, precious in Rome. One of the first bishops of Rome, they brought it. And they spoke to Pope Adrian, and they solved the problem. He supported them. And while they were there, one of the brothers actually died, and his relics are also in this church. So let's move to see. This is one of the there's quite a few like large medallions or icons. This one is probably about 1.5 meters, 1,500. It's labeled to the holy equal to the apostles, Kirill and Methodius from the Russian people. The various other Slavic people have their sort of commemorative boards as well. The Slovaks and Czechs and others. So this is a view of the narthex underneath the Church of St. Clement. This refers to a miracle of St. Clement that happened in the Sea of Azov. This is now these are not mosaics; these are frescoes, and they are from the 800s. So they were painted a decade or two after the visit of the two brothers. So they were painted in the 880s. And this one shows Christ with two angels and let's see, and my notes, who are these saints? It's all sort of mixed up. Anyway, one of them is this is Saint Clement, of course, the Bishop of Rome, and this is another church figure. All right, again, a commemorative plaque to the evangelizers. Some views. This is a fresco of the Ascension. So the apostles are looking up and Christ is ascending. Right. This is a complex composition from the life of Saint Clement, where a Roman pagan, Sisinnius, tried to interfere with this Christian service. He came in and then he was let out. There he is. So this is St. Clement serving. This is Sisinnius, and he's being escorted out. But he was he got so angry, he decided to come to the bishop's house later and to arrest him. Now, and all those around him. But something happened to him, and he had some sort of an effect where he began to see things in a distorted way, some sort of like sensory distortion. So here he's shown telling his servants to arrest a couple of columns and other architectural details lying on the ground, thinking that they are the bishop and his people. Right. This is the very famed composition of Archangel Gabriel appearing to the Virgin Mary, another view of the narthex. Now, this is an interesting composition. It is believed that this was a portrait of Empress Theodora, but later on somebody decided to paint Christ in here, and so it was sort of confusion. People were saying, well, who is this? Is this the Mother of God or something? But here is another picture of what could have been the Mother of God wearing imperial sort of clothes. Here, this is part of a composition which we have here at the back of the church or above the iconostasis. It's descended to Hades, and here Christ is taking Adam by the hand. All right. Is that it? I think that might be it. No more? All right, yep, that's it. That's the last one. Okay. All right, we went. So, yes. All right, well, we managed to get through that and to comment on most of the stuff. Yeah, except I began from the end. I was going to say Arrivederci Roma with the sunset. I'll show you. I'll just flick backwards. Where are we? It doesn't want to. Oh, we've gone. It doesn't matter. Not important. Yes. So that's the end of our presentation on the early Christian artwork in Ravenna and Rome, with a very, very quick look at the Tuscan cities and the end of our journey. Now, I was told to show a little bit more live coverage of what we were doing and showing us, but look, we barely managed to fit into an hour here, so it would have taken longer. So anyway, again, my apologies for a little bit of chaos this time, entirely from me. But maybe this has some interest in it to look at these. And I think what was inspiring to me was looking at these iconographic compositions, the mosaics and the frescoes, and connecting with them and sort of rejoicing in the time when Christendom was all together, okay, East and West, and confessed the one faith and lived the one life until it began to sort of come apart towards the end, towards the middle of the 11th century. And when it happened in 1054, the Great Schism, of course, at that time, people did not think that it would endure. People thought, well, these things happen, and they've happened before, and it'll be overcome. But unfortunately, certain events that I mentioned in my first talk, namely the Fourth Crusade and a really, really awful PR exercise by the Crusaders when they behaved so badly that afterwards the Byzantines preferred the Ottomans to the Western Christians to rule over them. We have expressions of that nature. And of course, that left such a deep hurt in the East because so many people were affected, and that really was the beginning of the end of the Eastern Roman Empire in the year 1204. I mean, even though the Byzantines re-established and reconquered Constantinople in the year 1261. Yes, that's right. See, 57 years, there was a Latin kingdom in Constantinople. Of course, a lot of people fled, and by the time the Ottomans came 2 centuries later, more than 2 centuries later, surrounded and conquered the city, there were barely 50,000 people living, not 500,000. It was a city that was just melting. Yes, so there's the culture of that, the high culture of the Byzantine architecture, mosaics, frescoes that we saw in a couple of those buildings in the east and in the west. Well, it could not be sustained any longer. At least not in Greece, because the Greeks, the Greek people, together with all the rest of the Balkan people, were conquered for hundreds of years, and so the center of and the hopes of the Orthodox went sort of north to where a tiny principality of Moscow was emerging and was quickly growing. But that's a big story in itself. Right? Our focus was on the early church and the unity of the church. That's for me, that was inspiring to see that in Ravenna, in Rome, the message that comes from these vaults, from these walls, from these images, is the same sort of tonality. But when as you move chronologically in the West, there's an emergence of the growth of humanistic focus on not so much on God, not so much on Christ, but on us human beings. Yes, the image that sums it up for me, of course, is Leonardo's exercise where he's got the man in the circle and the square. That's the centrality of the interests. Yes. Yeah. Mm. So with this, we finish our little excursion to Turkey, a couple of the Greek islands, and southern Italy, and then the Adriatic city of Ravenna. For a fortnight from now, we'll go back to our studies of the New Testament, and we will continue on the book of Acts. So, what's our date going to be in a fortnight's time, Chris? 23rd. Are we right for that? Anyway, as always, you'll receive a reminder from Chris if there's any adjustments in the dates, and so let you know. So let's finish off with prayer, usual prayers of Mother God. It is truly meet to bless thee, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, and the Mother of my God, for honorable and children, beyond compare, more glorious than himself, without corruption, gathered blessed to God the word, true Theotokos, thee we magnify. Thank you all.